Welcome to another episode of DD on the Spot. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Johnson. And before we get into it with our guest here today, I'd like to remind everyone that if you enjoy this content, to please give a like and subscribe down below. I'd greatly appreciate it. We have Asha Hadley on the podcast. She's an IFBB pro coming to us all the way from Houston, as well as being a registered dietitian and a 2020 Savannah Pro champ. But most importantly, she's our current guest. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Well, since I love torturing myself, what is the weather like in Houston today?
It is, unfortunately, it's cloudy, but it's warm today. It's balmy 73 degrees. It's going to get warmer, and then we're going to drop down into the frigid 30s, I think, towards the end of the week.
Oh my God, I'm almost going to cry on here. I mean, let's be honest, 30s for me right now is streaking weather because like I told her, it's -8 degrees right now in Minnesota, which is like it's not at that point yet, but when you've lived here long enough, like February, that's the dog days of winter. But once it gets to like -15, -20, that's when it like becomes difficult to breathe outside because every time you breathe in, you're like part of anything that's wet in your mouth just basically automatically freezes. So, that's a horror story in and of itself, but I don't want to get too much into that because I don't want to depress, most of our listeners, and then we'll have like 5 people watch us at the end because they're like, that's just too sad. So before we get into that, why don't you give us your backstory on what really inspired and motivated you to get in shape and how that led to where you're currently at right now?
Well, I grew up in a primarily fitness kind of focused household. So health was always, really important to the family. Fitness was always really important. Although I didn't get into organized team sports until like high school, middle school. But it was always getting into, something, staying physically active. So I did play sports in high school and middle school. It was volleyball, softball. I was okay at those. I wasn't really like a star athlete. And then in college, I got into distance running. So I would do like road races and things like that. And I also got into weight training. Um, so time in the gym, that's when I really, really picked up that interest. I would always read like, Muscle and Fitness Hers and Oxygen magazines, trying to find new workouts and things like that. So I continued on with the lifting, continued on with the running, which is a very rare combination. A lot of people don't run distance and lift too. So as I got older, I kind of went back and forth between those two. I would run more for a period of time, and then I would kind of cut back on the distance and then lift more. And finally, I happened on this gym where a lot of competitors trained, and people were getting ready for a show at the time that I started going. So I figured, everybody else is doing it, so I'll do it too. So that's when I got into my first competition prep. That was in 2011.
What was your nutrition like being a runner and a lifter? Because in order to put on anything, I mean, you must have been going through like 20,000 calories a day because, I have it hard enough on days when I go for runs. It's like, yeah, it's like my food bill. That's the most expensive thing I have.
Yeah. So nutrition back then, I honestly didn't pay as close attention to it as I do now. Even though my profession is nutrition, I've always eaten healthy and had a pretty healthy diet. So I kind of knew, you need a little bit more carbs for lifting. You need a little bit more carbs I'm sorry, for running, and then a little bit more protein for lifting. So I would kind of shift there, but it was just your basic kind of healthy diet, balanced diet back then.
Well, and especially when it comes to bodybuilding, I mean, there's so many myths that people have about the sport. Was there anything that you thought about the sport, before you got started in it, or was it just something where you're just like, oh, hey, this seems like it would be fun? That's something to, sort of dip my foot in and see what happens.
I had always kind of liked the more muscular female body. Like I said, I was reading Oxygen and Muscle and Fitness Hers, and I was like, I want to look like that. Not knowing that they don't really put bodybuilders on the cover. So back then, I think my view of bodybuilding was probably like I wouldn't want to go that far or wouldn't want to do that just because it was the mainstream kind of line of thinking back then.
And when you were getting started, I mean, so many people don't understand that 95% of the general public couldn't even get into the amount of shape that it was required to go into a prep. But then once you're on a prep, I mean, everything just becomes so scientific where, I mean, you got to get that right amount of food eaten. You got to work out, you can't miss any of your workouts. It just becomes such a scientific based lifestyle. And, it's really, you can't make any errors really in it. What was that like your first prep? Because for so many people, that's really just a shot, a really just a shot of, just, oh my God, like this is amazing. Like, what was that like for you when you first realized that, this is a totally different lifestyle than probably what you thought it might have been?
Yeah, so the first prep, I mean, comparing it now to what I do now, I was way off, but I would go and be like, "Oh, I can have some M&Ms every once in a while," or, just chicken wherever you get it is chicken, so it's protein. So I was definitely, into following a diet. My coach back then gave me a diet, but I would definitely take a lot of liberties that I know I can't take now. So it's just kind of a learning, I guess, progression. You see season after season how strict you have to get to those upper levels. So my diet first prep was, I would say it's probably similar to my off season diet now, where it's fairly clean, but it's got a few snacks in it too.
Well, and I mean, one thing that I also love to talk about in this lifestyle is genetics because so many people do not understand that, I have all these friends that are on Instagram and other platforms. Oh my God, I want his arms, I want her abs, I want their back. People just do not understand that you can only be the best version of yourself. I don't know how many times I have to shake them down and be like, you do not know how they got to that look. Some people are just born blessed. I mean, I've had guests on here that were born with like 12 packs, basically, where it's just like they can do no wrong. But whenever someone first gets started in the gym, they always have that one body part that really, really takes off that they don't have to train as much. And they have that one body part that they just have to train to oblivion. I mean, my back was the one thing that took off for me where, I had jobs all throughout college of lifting and loading boxes in warehouses where you either got a really nice back or you quit. But I'm 6'3", so my legs and my lower body are just absolutely shot. Where I mean, I could train them into oblivion. I could inject pure muscle into my legs, and they wouldn't even gain an ounce. I mean, don't even get me started on calves. I could do 10,000 calf raises a day, and they wouldn't even grow, a millimeter. But what were those body parts for you when you were getting started?
So getting started, when you first start lifting or you first start training, everything grows. So going from, non-competitor to competitor, you think you've changed like, an amazing amount. So, my lagging parts to this day are probably my calves, like you. I was listening to an interview with Andrea, who's the current Miss Olympia, and she says she never trains calves. And I was like,
I had her
what?
on and she told me that too, and I was like, "God, I hate you already. Like, I hate you so much right now."
I literally kill myself. My calves are sore today because I was, blasting them all weekend. So it's yeah, genetics plays a huge, huge thing, and that's something I tell people too is if you want to get to where your idols are, in any sport, it's training, discipline, and then you've got that part that you can't control, which is what you were born with or without.
Yeah. Well, and I was gonna say for you, the moment that you open a Trap City, are you kidding me? I mean, that's ridiculous. That's one thing that some people. That's another sort of somewhat genetic thing too. But we've also had people that have grown them by accident, where they're training shoulders or arms, and then all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, I'm kind of moving them wrong," so I get nice traps. So that's one thing that I really like. That's the traps are the one thing for me too. That's like one thing that I somewhat developed a little bit earlier on. But I mean, on top of all that too, I mean, there's so many myths into this lifestyle, and we talked about this briefly. I mean, it's the one thing that I bring up every single podcast because it needs to be dispelled is that, it's gotten better the last 5 years due to Instagram, but there are still so many women that have that fear that, the moment they walk into the gym, if they even look at the dumbbells, they're going to put on 50 pounds of muscle overnight. And, first of all, that's definitely not the case. And if, first of all, if that also ever happened to you, I'd spend my entire life savings to train with you then because you have found the secret that, everyone's looking for. I mean, you'd be the first ever trillionaire, let's be completely honest. But did you ever have that fear when you're getting started? And even if you didn't, I mean, I bet that you hear that all the time right now. I bet if you had a nickel for every time you heard that, I mean, you'd probably be having a butler serving you right now as we were speaking.
Yeah, yeah, that's nothing I ever worried about. I mean, the only thing I kind of worry about is fitting into certain clothes because the average female dress shirt that I have to wear to work sometimes just like I would rip it if I, moved my arms like this. So that was like, well, how big am I going to get and what size shirts am I going to need in the future? But worrying about muscle or getting too muscular was never really an issue with me. And I do hear it, like even my practice when I get into discussing or weight training with people, and they say, "Oh, I want to look like you, but not exactly like you or as big as you." I'm like, this is 20 years of work, so if you want to start that journey now, then maybe, 20 years down the line, you can look like this possibly, but it's not going to happen in a week, a month. It's likely not going to happen in a year. And if you do see yourself getting muscular, cut back on it. The muscle goes away if you don't train it. So,
And when if it does happen, you can become her trainer too. I mean, I'm sure she'd gladly take you on if that happened. But no, I mean, for me too. I mean, when I was at my peak muscularly, it was like probably like 3 or 4 years ago. I've lost a little bit of it because I had to have a job and do all this podcast stuff, and I still work out a lot. But I was at a friend's wedding, and I bent over and I ripped part of my jacket, but luckily it was the inside part of it, so it didn't show. But I was like, yeah, I know. That's when I kind of had my moment where I was like, yeah, this I finally made it. That's like the time when I was like, oh my god, I've gotten as big as, yeah. So that was that was a funny thing. But I mean, yeah, there are just so many things that especially with this lifestyle. But the one thing that I think impacts women so much more positively than men when it comes to working out is just that confidence boost that working out gives you. We've heard hundreds of stories on this podcast of women who have, they've either made life changing decisions. It's maybe helped them become more assertive. It's just that one thing that I think that you can take from the gym and use to impact every single aspect of your life is that confidence boost. How have you personally taken that confidence boost that working out's given you and used it to impact your life in a positive way?
um, I just think overall confidence it's helped. I mean, I don't know an area of your everyday life outside of the gym where confidence doesn't help you. Whether it's, for me, I'm a shy person by nature. And it's anything like having to call somebody or talk to a stranger or whatever. I find that really, as my prep goes along, or, I think about what I've done in the past, um, that confidence tends to help me a lot.
God, sometimes I do wish I was shy, but I'm one of those people who are like, I'm shy. I'm shy until you make the first move. Like if you make the first move and come up and say hi to me, I was like, wow, you really made a mistake because I'm going to talk to you for the next like 10 hours basically. But yeah, I'm one of those types of people where, yeah, I'm fun to have at parties, everyone, if you haven't caught that drift already now. But no, so yeah, I've had that answer a lot of times too, where there's shy people that, yeah, I would never be doing your podcast if I didn't have that confidence from the gym because, and that's one thing that I think needs to be preached on more is because more people just, I think if they understood that that confidence boost comes along with it, they would be more interested in, doing this and, even changing their lives. But at what point in your journey did you decide that you want to be a dietitian? Was that something that you'd always want to do since college, or when did you get into that field?
That came along when I was deciding my major, going into college. I chose the school I wanted to go to, which was the University of Florida, because they had a veterinary program and they were a state school. I lived in Florida at the time. And then when it came down to writing down what you wanted to do and choosing your courses, I was like, I don't know about that. I like animals. I don't know if I want to work on animals. So the next thing that was really interesting to me was health and nutrition, which I mentioned earlier was something that was like a cornerstone growing up in my life. It was eating healthy, eating healthy, living a healthy lifestyle. So I picked dietetics or nutrition to study, and that's how I ended up here.
Well, and being that you're in dietetics, and I have a few friends that are dietetics, and I sort of make fun of them where I said I could do your entire job in one sentence, where you just tell people eat less and walk more, and then you basically, yeah, you got, give me my check. No, I give them I give them a hard time about that. And I was like, you really went to college just for that? Really, I could have done that. No, I like to joke around with them, but what would you say are one of the most common things that you hear from people about, why they can't lose weight or why they're struggling? Because I feel, especially with coronavirus, everyone being at home more, this is the time where you could really get in shape if you wanted to, because a lot more people have that free time that they've always had that excuse where that's the number one excuse that I hear of all the time. I have all this free time. I mean, I don't have any free time. And then it's like, well, you do now.
Yeah. So the number one thing I hear when people come into my office is I don't know why I can't lose weight. And then we kind of go over their diet and lifestyle, and it's filled with fast food or processed food, or they're drinking or going out or whatever. So it's pointing those things out to them. And then with the lockdowns and everything with COVID, I've had a lot of people. We call it the COVID-15. So it's a lot of my job is getting people to realize their habits, when I'm talking to people about weight loss and stuff like that. Getting them to eat more fruits and vegetables, cook more, order out less, move a little bit more. So especially with being in Houston, the heat, a lot of people use that as, I call it, an excuse, not to their faces, but not to go out because it's too hot or it's too cold, or there's always some reason why they can't, get out and exercise.
As someone who's born and molded into the cold, anytime anyone from Houston says that it's too cold outside, I'll switch spots for you any day. But yeah, and plus if it's hot outside, just go outside and you're gonna sweat and lose some water weight. It's like good, it's like good God. But yeah, I do. I mean, I have some people from Arizona, and I get it when it's like 120 degrees. Yeah, I'm not going outside either. I mean, I'm one of those people too where if I had that, Houston weather in the summer where it's like 100 degrees, once it reaches 90 for me, yeah, I'm not going outside. Like I'll do my workouts indoors, but yeah, there's just I mean, it's just fascinating how people are responding to this pandemic, but we'll get into that shortly because I do got to ask with bodybuilding. I mean, the number one thing that I would have never guessed in a million years when I started this podcast is that it's the hardest thing for so many people is posing. I mean, I like to compare it now to being a perfect driver where you can be a great driver, you can never be a perfect driver, you can be a great poser, you can never be a perfect poser. It's always ever evolving, and for so many competitors, it's harder than your working out, it's harder than your nutrition. What has your experience with posing been like?
Ooh, it's tough. It's really tough, and it's one of those things that, again, along my journey competing, I realize how important it is. Like you said, it's as important as, nailing your diet and your conditioning, nailing your training. If you go out there and you don't know how to show your assets or hide, your weak spots, you're just not going to do very well. So posing is something that I try to practice as much as I can. I work with Kenny um, with posing also. He's an amazing coach. And I tell him and my husband, my sessions with him is probably the one thing I am afraid of during the week. I'm like, oh no, because he will tell you you look like crap or you're doing great. So it's Kenny scares me. Yeah,
That's another thing that people don't understand is that you'll be more sore from a lot of your posing sessions than you are from your actual workouts, which I mean, let's be
it's
honest, the
exhausting.
human
Yeah.
body is not meant to be flexed in that certain amount in that way for that long of a period of time. But I gotta say, Kenny Walk, I mean, he has a monopoly on this. Like everyone I talk to is training with Ken. I want to know what this guy like. I want to know how much he makes. He's like training everyone and stuff like that. Where it's like, good God, he's been the one guest that I've tried to have him on the podcast, but I haven't heard back from him. But yeah, I would love. So Kenny, if you ever watch this, I mean, I'd love to have you on and just talk about like how were you able to get this powerful that like everyone and their brother goes to you for posing. Where it's like, yeah, but that's as soon as someone says that they're training with Kelly, I was like Kenny, I was like, yeah, I know that they're serious then because yeah, he is by far the best, and that's what I've heard from basically everybody. But out of your poses that you do, what is your favorite pose and what is your least favorite pose?
My favorite pose, probably front bicep is a favorite, and my front abdominal thigh is a favorite. Um, my least favorite are probably just the quarter turns. Um, I just don't like those. And I don't like. I'm not a big fan of the tricep pose. So
Well, can I say that you are? I honestly just have this written down. You are our sixth guest out of like 300 bodybuilders that I've had on that have said that their ab pose is one of their favorites. That is the number one that we hear all the time. That's the least favorite, just because it's so awkward for so many people to like make it look like it's natural and fluid. But yeah, I that's hey, we learn something new every day, everyone. So yeah, an ab pose, and she has nice abs. I'm not gonna lie, everyone. So if I had abs like that, that would be an easier pose for me too as well. So that does help. I've realized that out of the six guests that have said that, yeah, their abs are really something to really take home. So that could be a reason why too as well. But I mean, when you're going on that stage, like I talked about with you briefly before, I mean, being on the mountain pitching, I was out there for hours at a time, 20, 30 times a year. You are on that stage for sometimes a minute at the most, a handful of times a year, even maybe even once a year, and you work 10 times as hard as I've ever worked. What is that feeling like for you when you get to walk up on that stage and show off all that hard work that you've worked months upon months on?
it's a really fulfilling feeling. It's like the culmination of all your work. Um, when I'm walking on the stage, it's probably the height of my confidence. I'm really happy. I'm feeling extremely grateful, especially to be able to show off, everything I've worked on. My mind is kind of racing through those poses or my routine to kind of get that nailed. But it's a really, really great feeling. It's exciting.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't imagine that, just putting in all that hard work for that. But when you're on stage, does time seem to slow down or speed up, or is it sort of a mixture in between?
I think it definitely goes slower, especially if you're getting into your routine or the music that they're playing. Sometimes at prejudging, you could just end up doing your own thing, and then they'll have to like pull you off stage. But I think time definitely slows down, and at least I can speak for myself. I really like to soak up all of that time on stage, especially when you're on stage by yourself.
Absolutely. And a question that I ask all of the pros that I have on the podcast, because for anyone out there who doesn't understand, I mean, for so many of these guests, winning their pro card is the highlight of their career, just because that is the affirmation of, all that hard work that they put into the stage is finally paid off. And what was that moment like for you when they announced your name and you realized, oh my God, I'm a pro now?
It was surreal. I, unlike a lot of people, won my pro card after a year of competing. So I went from starting to turning pro. So it was, I don't know that I was as grateful as somebody who spends years and years, trying to get it. So I was still really excited.
Yeah. Well, and we've had that story multiple times. We've had people that have won their pro card in like their first show, and I was like, okay, that's definitely lucky. And then we've had on the opposite people that have taken, like 20 years to win their pro card, So it really just is, yeah, a mixture of the two. But now we get into the coronavirus because I mean it's one thing that's impacted our lives in more ways than we could have ever imagined. I mean, being that you are in Texas, you're probably doing a lot better than we are here because here, everything's still locked down. The gyms have been shut down since November again, and I think they're about to open up in a couple of weeks. But what has this whole pandemic been like for you, especially with the gyms being closed? And I mean, let's be honest, for bodybuilders, gyms has their crack. So, the moment that the gym shut down here, I was like, oh my God, all my guests, they must be freaking out right now. But what was your what was your experience like during this whole pandemic?
So when the gyms closed, it was like, how are we going to get into the gym? Do I have like that special kind of status where we can sneak in? And we even tried that for like a week. And then the gym owner was like, no, I'm not going to risk it. So luckily, I have like a home gym. I've got barbells, bench, dumbbells. I've got a whole bunch of cardio equipment. So I was able to shift my workouts to home, and this was early enough in my prep so I wasn't lifting heavy enough and it wasn't as crucial where I needed a lot of stuff that's specifically in the gym at that time. So I wasn't working. They had, stopped me from working. So I would, go about my day and go get my workouts done, do my cardio, get in the pool, stuff like that. And those were my days. And luckily here in Texas, they opened up gyms, I want to say in March, I think it was. So I was able to get back in the gym a lot earlier than a lot of other people.
Yeah, they opened up back here in July and they closed down again in November. So yeah, you guys definitely had it a little bit easier when it comes to that down there. But how did you deal with all this stuff mentally too? Because so many people don't talk about the mental side effect of this. And I mean, let's be honest, I've been going cabin crazy where there's a line and I crossed that line like a couple months ago. I even told friends I was like, I'm crazy now. Like, let's be honest. I mean, I've just been so stirred up, and I'm one of those people where, as you can tell, I'm a very talkative person. So for me, this is like the worst prison sentence ever. I mean, if you want to, you don't even need to send me to prison if I do a crime. You just tell me that I can't talk to anyone for an extended period of time, and that's worse enough. But how have you been dealing with all this mentally?
I'm a homebody, so I enjoy being home. So it's not a big deal for me. And like I said, here in Texas, they opened a lot of things up a lot earlier, so we didn't have to experience, restaurants being closed for a long time, or the gyms or stores. We went through a very short period where it was like that. So for me, I'm also a very go with the flow type of person. So the more you try to push back against all these rules, whether you think they make sense or not, the more you're going to stress yourself out. So if you can't really change anything, either you choose not to put yourself in those situations or go to those places, or, you end up stressing yourself out. So the one thing I can say we are stressed about is my husband and I are trying to figure out where we're going to go on a vacation before my prep starts. And we were going to go to Cancun, but now you have to have a test to come back. And if you happen to fail that test, you're stuck there for 10 to 14 days. So we're not willing to take that risk. So we're trying to figure out if we want to go north to ski or, somewhere else, maybe California to chill out. But
Well, don't go north right now because it's like for the next 2 weeks it's going to be below zero. So you know that you're not going to have a fun time with that. But no, that's yeah. I mean, I have friends too that I mean, one of them just graduated from medical school and they're planning on going on a trip to Australia, and it's like, oh yeah, well that's not going to happen now, at least for a while. But yeah, so it's just yeah, just with all the stuff that's been going on. But even when you did get back into the gym, how was your prep this year different from years prior? Because even though all the stuff was opened up, I mean, I bet you probably had a different overall experience in your prep this year.
um, well, it was different because I had been off for 4 years, so I hadn't prior to this season. I had not competed since 2016. So I had not been through a prep since back then. So this season, everything was kind of is like learning to ride a bike again. Oh, this is what this feels like. But I kind of fell into it, and I really got kind of consumed with, just getting into the prep. So I enjoyed it. It wasn't necessarily hard for me. Towards the end of the year, it kind of got difficult just because of the time that I spent in prep. It was almost a whole year. But during the first portion of prep, I really liked it.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I mean, plus, I think a lot of people actually tended to more be on the enjoyment side just because they have so much more time to focus on it. Where for bodybuilding, this is the bad thing was that most of the gyms were closed, but the good thing is that, you have so much more free time to focus on it. And I mean, that's one thing that I think is the reason why there aren't more bodybuilders is because most people cannot function on, working for 8 hours a day and then going to the gym and working out and doing all that. Where, if everyone had this sort of time that they're having right now, I think a lot more people would want to do the sport but that's again what separates these freak human beings from everyone else is that they're able to put up with that and go through with all that. But you mentioned that you're a runner, and I mean, I hate running more than life itself. Cardio is my number one pet peeve. Where the moment you said that, I was like, oh god, so we have one of these mental head cases right now that actually enjoys it. But yeah, I mean, and when I say cardio, I mean like actually running. Like I can go walk on a treadmill for 80 minutes a day, which is what I'm doing now for like 5-6 days a week, just to have something to do. Where that's nothing for me. But running is a completely different story. But what is your relationship with cardio like now, especially being in bodybuilding? Where I mean, if you were doing the cardio that you were doing before, I mean, you probably wouldn't be able to gain as much muscle.
Yeah, so I've always liked cardio, I guess, unlike a lot of other people in bodybuilding. The only time I don't really like it is towards the end of the prep where you're really depleted and your coach is like, you need to do a whole nother hour after you've done everything else you've done during the day. It tends to be a downer. But cardio is something that I've always enjoyed. During prep, I kind of vary it from bike to rower to step mill to treadmill. I try not to run too much because then I'll lose too much muscle. But just before I started prep last season, I had run a half marathon in January and then got into prep for the season. So it's
Like
always been.
like why? Like I mean, I get it that the marathon was invented because a guy after a battle came and had to run that distance, but it's like what I just don't get what people say, "Hey, that seems like that would be a fun thing to do, just go for a run." I mean, it's like that's something that people do to survive and I even told one of my ex-girlfriends, it's like the only time you're ever going to see me run, you have to be chasing me with a knife. That's the only time you're ever going to see me like truly run. So, but that's just amazing, but the one thing that is the most important thing to this lifestyle, and I don't care what anyone says, is sleep. And for anyone that disagrees with me on that, I always tell them pull an all nighter and then go and try to work out and tell me how that goes. I did that twice in college, and both times I lasted about halfway through, and I was like, okay, screw this. I'm going back to my room and trying to get some sleep. But what is your relationship with sleep like? Because especially in this day and age with technology, I mean, so many people aren't getting that proper amount of sleep. And let's be honest, with the range of guests that I've had on, some guests can function off that 4 hours, and some guests need, like 10 hours to sleep. But where do you fall in that spectrum?
I have to get my 8 hours, especially if it's a work day. I will definitely be to bed on time because I have to get up earlier those days. Working in the healthcare field, I know the importance of sleep, and how it affects your appetite, with bodybuilding, how it affects your performance, just your overall health. So as I get older too, I realize that sleep is, part of that whole recovery and that non-active aspect of being healthy in bodybuilding too. So 8 hours is what I aim to get every night, and I definitely it's hard with technology, like you said, because be scrolling and scrolling and realize you've been scrolling for an hour. So it's something that I'm pretty disciplined on.
Well, I've been struggling just because I used to work nights before this pandemic. So, I'd be going to bed. Some of these guests that I have on would be getting up at like 4 a.m. And it's like, oh, hey, that's when I'm going to bed. So, even today, like I went to sleep at like 2:45 and then I got up at like noon. So yeah. So I'm one of those weird people where, and even when I'm doing podcasts, I tell them it's like not before 11 a.m. That's the earliest that I can do. And I'm being completely honest because I've had times where I've tried to push it at 10 and then I wake up at 10:30. I was like, oh crap, I had a podcast to do. So that's, that's my earliest. But yeah, sleep, I mean, that's just the most undervalued thing I think, and no one really ever talks about it too. That's why I love to bring it up. And the first time I realized that, I was like, why is no one discussing this? Because it's something that I really think should be discussed. But a training technique that I love to talk about on this podcast, because I was familiar with it before I started the podcast and I practiced it a little bit, but not as much as I'm doing it now, is time under tension. Do you like to do a lot of time under tension in your training?
My coach has me doing a lot of time under tension. It's something that was kind of new to me this season or this prep. So it's, slow reps, depending on the rep range. He has me doing a lot of slow reps. So that's one of the things that I think really is helping me to grow.
Which I gotta say, for anyone out there who has trouble growing their legs, never do a time under tension leg workout. I did that, and the next day I woke up, got about 5 steps from my bed, and then I fell over basically. Where I was like, "Yep, never doing this again." But yeah, it's just those are some of the hardest workouts to do. Where I mean, it's just yeah, it's just amazing.
Humbling.
Yeah, it's definitely humbling. Well, speaking of humbling, I would get killed in the comment section if I didn't ask you, what do you train for shoulders? Because that's one thing that for women, that is the number one body part that I've heard that, is the one thing that they struggle with. And I can guarantee if I didn't ask you that, they'd be like, Ryan, why didn't you ask her what she does for shoulders? I'm trying to get like anything that really helps me there. Because yeah, if had a poll, I'd say about 75% of the answer when I ask what's one body part that you struggled with, it's shoulders. So what does a shoulder workout look like for you?
So shoulders, I'd have to say it's genetics driven, just like my traps. I never trained traps before this last season. Like never did a shrug or anything like that. I think it has to do with running and how I run. But when it comes to shoulders and delts, my workouts consist of my coach has me doing this new thing. It's called 6 ways, where you're going up, out, and down. And those I hate with a passion because you pick up some tens and they will kill you.
And then people are just looking at you like, wow, that girl who's really ripped is like struggling with 10 pounds. I was like, what's going on over there? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, Overhead presses I do for shoulders. A lot of uh, lateral raises with shoulders, cables, and dumbbells. So getting a variety of, either machines, cables, or dumbbells when doing whatever shoulder movement, I think helps a lot too.
Well, and again, I stress this almost every time too. People need to realize there's more than one part to the shoulder. It's 3 parts. A lot of times people are just like, I'm gonna train my shoulders. And I was like, well, what are you trying to train? Like the front, medial, or the rear? And then they're just like, oh, I'm just gonna do some shrugs and stuff like that, or like some raises. And I was like, oh, well, okay. If you want to actually have your shoulders grow, you need to work all of them. So that's definitely another thing as well. That I mean, again, that's what separates the people that really take things seriously as opposed to just the average gym goers. Which I mean, let's be honest, there's nothing wrong with doing that. And also, people just got to realize too, weights are not the answer for every single person. I've had so many people where they struggle with the weights and then they just quit because they don't realize, hey, you can do yoga, you can go on bike rides, you can go do whatever you want. Not everyone's meant to do weights. Look at those CrossFit people. They don't even lift weights properly and most of them are really shredded where you're just like, so yeah, I mean that just shows it in and of itself, but yeah, that's my little spiel there, but I mean, let's be honest, you are not the average looking woman when it comes to, just if you were dressed the way you are right now and you walked out in public, I mean, you sort of become like a mini celebrity is the best way I can describe it because it's just human nature when they see something that's not familiar to them. They're just like, oh, wow, that's interesting. And what has that been like for you sort of getting adjusted to that fact that, I mean, when you go out in public and especially, during the summertime or if you're wearing anything that doesn't cover up, every single ounce of you, and even sometimes if you are covered up, you can still see that you're a very in shape person. What has that been like for you sort of getting used to the fact that, I mean, you are going to draw people's attention?
It's taken a while. So in the beginning, back when I used to do women's physique, I would have my issues with getting stared at. You didn't feel very confident back then, or I didn't. So it's kind of something that I've learned to embrace. And I don't know if it's just come with time or maturity or what, but it's probably one of the harder things that competitors, especially when you're getting up in the muscle, have to learn to embrace, I guess you could say. But now I love it. I really like the attention. I do have my days where I just want to be invisible or a normal person. So that's rare where I feel like that. But for the most part, I'm extremely proud of all the hard work that I've done. And, I don't walk around showing it off, but if somebody compliments me, I take the compliment. I feel very thankful for it. So it's been a journey, learning to accept it and love it and be proud of it.
Yeah. And it's just so great that you talk about that because there's some people that come on this podcast and they talk about like, oh, I was never bothered by it or I'm always bothered with it. It's like, no, let's be honest. I mean, there's people go through stages too where even there's days where I can totally tell where people would just be like, hey, don't come up to me or whatever. Like, I just want to be in my own zone. So yeah, I appreciate you saying that. But if someone were to walk up to you and say, we made the decision, you can change one thing about the sport of bodybuilding and everyone would go along with it, what would be one thing that you would like to see changed?
Ooh. Um, hmm. No, that's a hard one.
We saved the hard ones for the end here, people.
I think, and this is probably going to be the not popular answer, but the the organization, like the IFBB as a whole, I would kind of maybe have them be more pro competitor, um, and kind of help us along in that way. They're kind of like a silent entity almost. And if you look at any other professional sport, and we all want to call ourselves professional athletes, like the NFL or the NBA or the MLB or the MLS. Um, they work on promoting their athletes, and it's a whole different type of organizational structure. If I could change one thing, I would make the IFBB kind of be something like that, you know.
Which I totally agree with, where it's like, yeah, you need to promote these athletes because it's like social media accounts only do so much where it's like, yeah, and plus, I mean, it's like I even look back in the day, they used to have bodybuilding on ESPN. It's like, where did that go? I see cornhole on ESPN, and I was like, how is cornhole more of a? I mean, first of all, that wrist action, yeah, you got to be definitely in great shape for that. But it's like, how does a sport that you play drunk in someone's backyard get on ESPN as opposed to so yeah, that's one thing that I don't understand as well, and you know especially in these times, you never know. But if we were to talk to a year from now, if we were to have talked to you a year ago, and you would have predicted a global pandemic and everything that happened, I would have called you a liar and bet my entire life savings against you. So goes to show how much this really means. But who knows? We could be talking a year from now, and you could hear gunshots, you could see fire in the background. Who knows what the world's going to be like a year from now? But in an ideal world, where would you like to be at in your bodybuilding? Where would you like to be at just in your overall life? What are some goals that you would like to have achieved if we were to talk to you a year from today?
Um, I think every bodybuilder wants to just get, I guess, bigger or better. For me, it's improving conditioning every year. Since I took time off, it's kind of like the what ifs. What if I would have spent the past 4 years competing or training like I was competing? So I'm kind of making up for lost time. So I definitely want to make, those gains and improvements in my muscle maturity and density over the next year. I'd definitely like to be back on the Olympia stage, hopefully this year. And, as far as I can make it, in the sport.
Well, and if it's not too personal, why did you take that 4-year hiatus? Was it just to put on size, or what was the reasoning behind that?
So after I did the Olympia in 2016, and that was probably the most intense prep I've been through. And I felt like after that, I needed a break. So I told my coach I'm going to take a year off. And that year just turned into 4 years. And during that 4 years, I honestly thought I was retired. I would tell people I was retired. I would also tell them I never really took returning off the table, but it was kind of way back there. So I didn't worry about trying to maintain a lot of size. I actually tried to lose, a little muscle. I ran a lot more. So I was also I was always still athletic and still in the gym. I just wasn't trying to maintain that size, but it kind of got away from me, and then, like, I ended up coming back.
Hey, it happens. I mean, I've been doing this podcast for 2.5 years, and it still seems like yesterday was the day that I did my first podcast. And then you just blink, and you're like, "Oh wow, this has definitely been a while." But again, you guys, we cannot thank her enough for coming on and sharing her story. Before we wrap things up, is there anyone that you'd like to give a shout out to?
Um, hmm. All the fans out there, thank you. Thank you, Ryan, for having me on. My husband, Brad, for supporting me. He was the driving force to me getting back on the stage. So I'm always grateful for him and everything he does. And everybody, there's a whole team of people that are behind the scenes of pretty much every bodybuilder, whether it's their coach, their posing coach, their nutritionist, my massage therapist, my chiropractor, everybody behind the scenes that works, the lady that makes my suits. It's a lot of people to thank, and a lot of people don't realize when we go on the stage and you see what we've done in the gym, there's a whole team of people usually that work to get us there too. So it's a big thank you to everybody that's helped to support me.
Well, before we wrap up, I mean, you mentioned massage therapist, and that's one thing that people do not understand too is that your massage therapist might become your best friend because I've had that happen to me twice where I went in to get a massage, greatest feeling of all time afterwards. But when you get massages, I mean, bodybuilders get different massages. A lot of them, some of them do the cupping, but then other ones do the one where they just got the crap beat out of them, where their back is basically like purple and stuff. What kind of massages do you get? Do you mix it up, or is it sort of just you just get like the deep tissue stuff, or because I think I mean, first of all, I don't have that strength where like if someone was beating the crap out of me, I wouldn't just sit there and take it, just be like, yes, this is for the better good. But what are your massages like?
I typically get deep tissue. If there's any like nagging area or joint, I'll have her work on that. I do cupping because I have some back issues, so that really helps a lot. But I don't really go for the crazy stuff. Like, I don't like to be bruised after. The most of the time, I'm telling her I just want to relax because it's really the time where I can kind of let my mind go and I'm not thinking about stuff I need to do.
Oh yeah, I mean that's definitely the most important part for me too. So yeah, anyone out there, go and get a massage if you're really stressed out. That's one of the things that I just I cannot stress that enough. But again, you guys, we cannot thank her enough for coming on and sharing her story. Everyone, go and give her a follow on her Instagram page down below. I highly recommend it. And again, buyer beware. You will be inspired to get in shape and stop eating those Twinkies and get off that couch. But again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your journey. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And again, you guys, this is Ryan Johnson, DD on the spot, signing out. Have a great day, everyone.